Order, order. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee of the House of Commons. We continue our accountability hearings this morning with water companies. We'll be hearing first of all this morning from South West Water, the Pennon Group, and then later this morning Yorkshire Water. Very pleased to have with us this morning Susan Davy, Chief Executive of the Pennon Group and South West Water. So Susan, for the benefit of the official record and for those who are following our proceedings, can I ask you first of all to introduce yourself to the committee?
Of course. Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. So I'm Susan Davy. I'm Chief Executive of Pennon Group PLC. We're a FTSE 250 listed business, and we have 4 key operating subsidiaries: South West Water, a licence holder, Sutton East Surrey, a business-to-business retailer, Pennon Water Services, and our renewables energy business, Pennon Power.
Okay. Now, South West Water is a water and sewage company. The remainder of your group are water companies. Is that correct? Now, you're not just Chief Executive of Pennon Group and South West Water. You have other interests in the wider industry. You're a board member of Water UK. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you're president of the Institute of Water. Is that also correct? So
Correct.
you're not just a leader in South West Water, you have a leadership role within the industry as a whole.
Yes, correct. And my membership of the Institute of Water, it's celebrating its 80-year anniversary this year, and that institute is very much focused on making sure that we've got trained, qualified experts across the sector, and that's really its focus, to make sure we've got education and qualifications that are relevant to our sector. So very pleased and honoured to be president of that this year.
Okay, I'm sure it is an honour indeed. Just looking at the role that you play as controlling mind, if I can put it like that, of South West Water and Pennon Group. Talk me through the culture that you are seeking to create within the group and the company, because you've been there since 2015 as CFO, is that right?
So I actually joined the group in 2007.
Right.
I then I had a variety of roles on the South West Water side, and then I took the Pennon CFO role in 2015, and then was CEO from 2020.
That's 2020.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So the culture within the group, how do you see the importance of environmental responsibility, transparency, customer engagement, these things?
Yeah, so I think, given the nature of what we do for our communities and for the region, we rely on the natural environment to deliver our services. So how we want to look after that natural environment, we're a huge water recycler in effect, how we want to look after that natural environment and protect it, enhancement, and make sure that it's there for us and for everybody to enjoy is absolutely paramount. I obviously sit around the board table, and it is top agenda on the board every time we meet. Second only to health and safety of my 4,000 brilliant colleagues across the group.
Okay, and how important is customer engagement?
So customer engagement, we probably a couple of things to say. So probably as a first in the UK, and certainly a first in our sector, we are FTSE listed business, and we have embarked on a process of making our customers shareholders in the business. So we have now some 80,000 customers who are shareholders. By number, they're 4 times as many as the institutional shareholders that we have, not by value but by number. And so we engage, and I engage with those customers who are shareholders, but also customers more broadly, every couple of weeks. I meet customers. Last year I must have met around 1,500 customers individually. It's something I really like doing. We go out on the road, we do virtual meetings as well, so we meet customers all the time.
Do you feel you perform well in terms of customer engagement? Well,
I think in terms of there is a lot for us to do. There is a lot for us to improve. We have made some improvements. There are areas...
Yes or a no? I'm struggling a wee bit here.
So in terms of engagement, we have always got more to do in terms of engagement, and we know when we look at our customer service scores across the group that we have, South West Water customer service scores are probably below average in terms of where they need to be. Bristol Water are top quartile in the sector. Certainly Surrey, that we've just picked up last year when we acquired them, again are towards the lower end. So there is more that we need to do in terms of our customer service satisfaction.
As a public-facing company, a commercial interest, how important is transparency to you?
Well, we're a FTSE listed business, so we obviously want to make sure we're as transparent and as open as we can be with all that we do. If I look to some examples, we launched a couple of years ago now for our Devon and Cornwall region our WaterFit Live website, which was all about giving information about the use of storm weather flows, which is a huge concern, not just across our region, but more nationally. And we launched that website to try and give our customers and our communities information about the assets and how we were performing and what was happening to those assets. As we got all the monitoring in 2022, we wanted to make sure that we could be sharing that. So I think there are areas where we have obviously progressed in terms of being transparent with our information, and we put a lot of things onto our website and into the public domain in terms of what we do.
Okay, look, well, there's some very well documented cases where you've been involved in court action as an accused, effectively, as a defendant. But you've also had a number of your customers actually taking you to the small claims court. Is that correct? For the loss of amenity as a consequence of losing access to waterways from sewage pollution. We've been told that actually South West Water has settled these, offering financial settlements in court, but on the basis of them signing a non-disclosure agreement. Is that correct?
So in terms of, well, first thing to say, I hear the concerns that my customers...
Okay, can we just maybe break this down? Is it correct that you have settled claims in the small court on the basis of NDAs?
I would have to go and check that piece of information. I apologise, I don't have that here today. I am aware that we have had... so if I think about our customer service teams, when we have people who come through to our departments and they are dissatisfied with the service that we have given, occasionally we will offer them some financial compensation for any loss that they've incurred. So I would have to check this particular
Given though what you've just told us, is that consistent with settling small claims cases on the basis of NDAs?
I would have to check that specific piece. I'm so sorry that I don't have that information here with me today, but I will check with the team. That is not something that we do as a matter of course, is probably what I would say, but I would just have to check that specific piece of information.
If you could perhaps come back to us on that.
Of course.
Looking at some of the other instances involving court action and prosecution, 2023, you were sentenced on 13 charges and fined £2.1 million for 4 years of environmental offences. Now, just looking at these environmental offences, 6 were for illegal water discharge activities and 7 for contravening environmental permit conditions. You had to pay costs of $280,000 and a 170 victim surcharge. Can we just look at some of the things that were involved here? Their company discharged harmful chemicals from treatment works on more than one occasion, causing significant environmental damage to sites at Kilmington, on the River Axe, and Crediton on the River Creedy. Thousands of fish died, and the acts and the discharge included some protected species. You breached permit rules in Lostwithiel in July 2016 by pumping raw sewage into the River Fowey. Control room alarms showed there was an issue, but the discharge continued for more than 12 hours. Is this all correct? You can stop me if I'm getting anything wrong here.
No.
The alarms also went off at Watergate Bay Treatment Works in August 2016, but no action was taken and sewage was illegally discharged into the coastal waters for more than 35 hours. E. coli levels were found to be 2,000 times higher than the level at which water quality would be classified as poor. You described these as isolated incidents. At what point do isolated incidents cease to be isolated and become a course of conduct?
Well, I suppose a couple of things to say. We absolutely, and I absolutely regret and do not condone those instances and those pollutions that we had. We do not want to harm the environment. That is not the activities that we undertake every day. That said, we are a business that looks after critical national infrastructure. We have a network that, if you laid it on the water and wastewater side, the circumference of the world would be wrapped round with the network that we have. Mm-hmm. We have hundreds of treatment works and we have thousands of pumping stations, and from time to time
we know that. Are you telling us that you've got more than you can manage?
No, I think I'm just highlighting that from time to time things do go wrong, and the important thing is that we learn from those lessons. So with that particular set of cases and incidents, we obviously were fined, and rightly so held to account for that. Judge Matson, who presided over that case, I personally wrote to the judge, and we set out an action plan that we would put in place to address some of the findings that came from those instances, because we do not want those instances to continue. But they do happen from time to time, but we want to make sure that we learn from those instances and those lessons.
Just then to look at some of those incidents that happen, as you say, from time to time. All sewage companies in 2023 to 24 were expected to have no more than 22.4 pollution incidents per 10,000 kilometres of sewer. Can you tell the committee what South West Water's performance was against that target?
In terms of, I like to look at it in terms of absolute numbers of pollutions, because one pollution
if I told you the information I have
194.
Is that against that target of 22.4, you had a 111.24 pollution incidents per 10,000 kilometres of sewer. Would that sound familiar to you?
That's correct. We had 194 individual incidents, and then when you normalise it with the kilometrage, that's the number that you get.
So, do you know, just out of interest, you top that league,
Correct.
Who the second worst company would be and what their performance is?
I'm really focused on our performance, which isn't where it needs to be.
As a matter of interest then, Southern Water also come in at 58.9, so you're almost double the second worst performing company. What are you doing about that?
Yes, so perhaps if I talk about what we've been doing over the last couple of, since my tenure as CEO, there are two priorities that I wanted to make sure we delivered on. The assessment around pollution incidents and impacts to watercourses is part of the story in terms of impact to the environment, and the Environment Agency's EPA measures around about 4% of pollutions, but pollutions happen when customers' homes get impacted by sewage, their gardens, their roads and highways. And so I set ourselves a task of reducing pollutions to customers' homes, and we've got that down by 60% since 2020, to gardens, to roads, and we've got that down by a quarter since 2020. And then in terms of pollutions to watercourses, if I think about the southwest and Devon and Cornwall, around about 70, just over 70% of our asset base is coastal and faces into those watercourses and estuaries. And that's where we have been focusing on making sure we can reduce the number of pollutions that hit a watercourse by working on our network, which is one of the areas you can get a pollution from, by working on our pumping stations and by working on our treatment works. Since 2020, the number of network pollutions have come down by about 40%, but we have work to do on our pumping stations and our treatment works. We were seeing a reducing trend, so from 2020 to 2022, we went from 225 pollutions to a watercourse to 108, so that brought it down and halved it. And the network numbers came down, as I said, by around about 40%. Then we had, not to say the weather is an excuse for it, but we did have 30% more precipitation over the last 2 years and 30% higher groundwater. That has put significant impact on our pumping stations and treatment works that we are now looking at how we obviously mitigate and avoid that. So we are making activities and efforts that will reduce and eliminate those pollutions. I'm pleased with the work we've done for customers' homes. We're now down to 59 homes across the whole of those counties that are at risk of sewer flooding, which is one of the most awful things that can happen to a home, is to get sewer flooding in it.
59?
So 59.
Down to?
Down to 59.
And that's a source of satisfaction?
We want to eliminate them, but we've taken it down by 60%. We've got more to do. We want to eliminate that, but we have got those down.
But down over what period of time?
Since 2020.
Since 2020. From what number to 59?
So it's down by 60%, so just over 130.
So over 5 years, you've had 5 years and these 59 homes are still affected.
So we've got them on the plan to take them out, but we'll be
No, but just to be clear,
yes.
After 5 years, these 59 homes are still affected.
But they're at risk.
If you lived in one of these homes, how would you feel?
Which is why we're focused, which is why I was so focused on getting these numbers down. We are the best performer in the sector in this area. We have been for some time because it is such an awful thing to happen to customers and their homes. So we're really focused on making sure that we can deliver on that plan. Okay,
you touched there on precipitation. You have some of the highest storm overflow usage in the country. But the Environment Agency data suggests that only 12% of them are due to increased rainfall. Why are you relying so heavily on storm overflow usage?
The storm overflows is something that we all want to make sure the use of is reduced and eliminated where we can. We've put the monitors in 2022, and so we can see what's happening in our network now. Now, over the last 15 years, we've had a 2% per annum increase in flows coming into our system. Now, only 0.3 of that 2% is due to increased population, increased homes. So we've had a significant rise in flows coming into our system. Now, if I just describe the southwest, for Devon and Cornwall, waste treatment was put in for the first time in the majority of those coastal towns and homes in the 90s and in the 2000s with our programme of Clean Sweep. And prior to that, the sewage from homes and businesses was collected at the bottom of the catchment and then released into the environment without being treated. So there was a real encouragement to get flows into that network, because if you're going to release something like raw sewage into a beach or an estuary, you want to make it as dilute as possible. So we have a significant amount in our network of flow and runoff and diverted water culverts, diverted streams. So we have a real job to do to take those flows out of the system. And we've got a programme that we've put in place. It will take us 15 years. But we have put that programme in place to start to take those flows out of the system and or make sure that we can treat flows.
In the meantime, storm
around.
flow management is part of your overall management portfolio, yeah?
Of course it is, yes.
Right,
yeah.
it is.
It is, yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to major incidents in customer satisfaction. Jane.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to just carry on with that a little bit. Obviously, I'm from Cornwall. Cornwall relies really heavily on our beaches, particularly for tourism, for our economy, for health, and yet South West Water has the worst performance amongst sewage companies for pollution incidents last year, hugely worse than other ones. We have surfers getting ill. We have the headquarters of Surfers Against Sewage in Cornwall, of course. People come down on holiday to Cornwall. Porthlooney Beach, for example, is amongst the top 13 dirtiest beaches in the UK. Would you bring your children on holiday to Porthlooney Beach?
So I hear the concerns. I hear the issues. And we have got our programme in place to eliminate pollutions. That's when things go wrong on our system. So make sure we can eliminate those. And then for storm overflows, we've got our 15-year programme to take those flows out of the system so that we can reduce impacts to the environment.
So what will the impacts be on places like St Agnes and Porthlooney that aren't part of the initial programme to look at those storm overflows? How long will it take for those places?
So the one thing I would say in terms of bathing water quality, because I use the waters myself, I live in Devon, I holiday in Cornwall, I'm always in the water as well. So I know how important it is to make sure that we keep those beaches as good as they can be and excellent. Now, if you look at bathing water quality, and I go back 25 years, bathing water quality was around about 28% in terms of beaches that achieve the excellent standard. You map forward now to where we are today, and we've got 98% of our beaches achieving good or excellent and 100% achieving the standard. So there is an improvement.
You can hear the whole of Cornwall almost screaming at me that it's getting worse. Last year it did get a lot worse than it had been previously. So how come it's getting worse? How come there are these CSOs disposing onto beaches when it hasn't even been raining? What can we do about that quickly?
So we have already started our programme. We started a couple of years ago with our WaterFit programme. So I've got shareholder support to put money in to invest in beaches. And if you look at the use of storm overflows through the bathing season from 2020 to last year, even though we've had that increased precipitation and flows, those triggers for bathing beaches and the duration of flows for bathing beaches have come down by a quarter. It's not enough. We have got to do better and to eliminate, but it will take time. We've got to take flows out of the system, and where we can't take the flows out of the system easily, we have to build storm storage so that we can store that storm water to then put back around the system and treat it later. So it is going to take time. I think the other thing to note as well...
Could you say a time frame? Somewhere like St Agnes, which isn't on that programme, the initial programme, how long do you think it will be until they are not having sewage disposed of on the beach?
So I know St Agnes and Trevorner's Cove really well. I've been there quite a number of times. I know there's a stream and a culvert that goes right down through that area right onto the beach, and there are many inputs to that water course. And if you look at the information that we have, not just for that water course but for others more broadly, we make up 12% of the issue for poor quality water. 88% is from other sources. What we're trying to do is work, and we have been to Trevorner's Cove and talked to the residents there in the community about what else we can do in the catchment to relieve some of the issues that we see. So there's the very famous picture of Trevorner's Cove with what looks like a really brown slick, and that is coming from up in the catchment to do with the land management that's happening there. And that
There'll
has
always be problems with agriculture and other things, that's
yes.
true, but of course you need to focus on what you can do about that. So from your point of view, to St Agnes, when will you be looking at the CSOs there?
So I will get back to you with where it is on the programme for that one. I know we have done work. There are 2 pumping stations in particular that we need to look at. And one of them is quite tight in terms of putting in more storage for the flows that come in. So what we're looking at is how we can take some of the flows out of the system upstream to alleviate the triggers for those stormwater flows. But I will come back to you with the exact date.
But you can see my point. It's beaches all across Cornwall, and it's getting worse, not better. And it's really impacting on our economy as well as the health of the people who live in Cornwall. So I had to pass that on today. It's very important that you understand from the people of Cornwall how much it's impacting.
I do understand. I live in Devon. I go to Cornwall all the time. I use the water. I paddleboard badly, but I use the water all the time. I really understand it. I understand how important it is to the region. We have focused on 49 beaches over this last couple of years. We've got all the other beaches to do. We're now up to 153 beaches that we need to focus on. So I understand the concerns. I understand what we need to do. I want to reassure that if you look at the bathing water tests that we do, they are returning excellent conditions. And one of the things that we've done as well is we've got 16 beaches where we are sampling all year round, because the other issue that we've got a bathing season, which is a bit of an anachronism.
Are you happy to help residents sample? Because a lot of the residents, for example, at Mylor Creek, which is having sewage spills at the moment, they want help to go down and take sampling themselves. Is that something that you'd be prepared to do?
What we're doing at the moment, we're testing 15 different beaches, and we're using tests that are almost, for want of a better term, like a litmus test for bacterial load, to see what that's looking like, alongside a much more clinical laboratory test to see if the results come back the same. So if these
I'm sorry to intervene here, but Jane asked you a very direct question about your willingness to assist.
Of course we will. And as far as, apologies, what I was trying to articulate and badly was that we're testing these rapid bacteriological tests and see if they work.
Offering that support. I wanted to move very quickly on to supply before I run out of time, because in July there were residents in St Eville without supply for 2 weeks. I had the same in my constituency in the Roseland as well. I think the hospital was even impacted by that, and yet over previous years we've had problems with supply. We've had hose pipe bans. We probably had, I think, the longest hose pipe ban in history in Cornwall. So what are you doing to improve on supply to hit those targets? I think those were caused by burst water mains. What are you doing to prevent that happening in future?
Yes, so as I articulated earlier, we do have a large infrastructure in terms of the network, and from time to time those situations do occur. What's important is how we have resilience in the network to avoid customers being off and interrupted for their supply. Over the last 4 years, we have reduced the interruptions that we have by around 20%. But one interruption is one interruption too many for our customers, and certainly communities get impacted by that. So we are looking at how do we do 2 things: make sure we've got not just resilience in the system, which we do have to switch sources, and you will probably know very well, we have a Cornwall spy main, as we call it, that goes right down the centre of Cornwall, and then we have a resilience network that sits alongside as well. What we have to make sure is that we've also got more resilience into the network, and in our plans that we've got for the next 5 years, there is investment to make sure that we can have greater resilience, so that customers shouldn't be interrupted for long periods of time. If something happens, if a burst happens, we get there quickly, we isolate it, and then we can resource for customers get back on. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is around how do we support customers when we have a situation like that. And we do give financial support, but also practical support around delivering water, delivering a tanker to the hospital that was out of water as well. But we need to do better at that. and we need to think about the
back
impact
online
it
more
has.
quickly. It
Exactly.
took a while to do
It
that. I
did.
just had one more question about customer satisfaction, because South West Water is very low on customer satisfaction levels, having been 12 out of 13, I think, for the last 3 years, and Bristol is better. So my question is, what are you doing about those low rates? How do you intend to improve them? Will you be learning from Bristol and improving, or will Bristol be getting worse?
Yeah, so well, I'm really pleased to say we bought Bristol in 2021, and Bristol remains a top performer and is in the top quartile for all companies. Now, the good thing about having the acquisitions that we've got in the group is that we can learn. So one of the things we are doing, we've got making sure that we've got all our systems on the same basis. So when customers can ring through, and the teams that are doing that, we've got a consistent basis for them to quickly be able to respond and understand what's happening. So we're getting everybody on the same system, which will be really helpful. We are learning some of the initiatives across the rest of the group from Bristol. So they've got a really great one called In Your Shoes, which is all about what's it like to be in a customer's shoes when something goes wrong.
Do you feel that it's getting better now, or are you still waiting for that improvement to come?
It will take us some time, I think, to make sure that where we have incidents and issues in Devon and Cornwall, that we are responding in a way that customers feel confident with our approach to that particular incident, but that things won't go wrong again. So we have more to do.
For example, the incident I was talking about in Myla, they contacted me in the end because they had sent many, many questions and they hadn't been able to get any response at all. So it still obviously isn't where it should be.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
We maybe keep answers a bit shorter.
Of course, sorry, Chair.
We have a lot to go over. Thank you, Jane. Anna, you were going to raise some questions in relation to the Cryptosporidium outbreak. No. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Jane. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Susan, we've heard a lot about your failures, your company's failures today. Sewage, flooding. We're going to come on to talk about an incident that landed your customers in hospital. It was so serious. But apart from your last answer where you said you were sorry to hear something, I haven't heard you say sorry to your customers for your company's failings. I haven't heard you say sorry to Jane's constituents that were left without water and having their beaches dumped with sewage. Will you say sorry to your customers?
Of course, I say sorry all the time when we have incidents. I should say it more today, and I am sorry. I am always sorry where something happens either to our customers and it impacts them, or to the environment. I'm reserved apology, of course.
You've talked about how you're committed to transparency as a company. I've heard that when you have had major incidents ongoing, the local BBC and ITV have asked for interviews with you, and you as chief executive have refused to be interviewed by the media during the Cryptosporidium incident. Is that correct?
So for the Cryptosporidium incident, first of all, can I just say...
We'll come on to the incident shortly and the details of that. But is it correct that you have turned down media interviews at times of extreme panic among your customers?
What I wanted to do in that incident was make sure I was supporting my colleagues and communities on the ground for what was happening, and making sure that they were getting all the information they needed from my...
You weren't able to speak
director.
to the media?
I was wanting to speak to my customers who were on the ground.
Wouldn't the media be a good way of doing that?
So what I wanted to make sure that we did was get all our information out to our customers and make sure they were very clear with what was happening in that instance. So I had my incident director and my customer services director who were doing that twice daily to make sure that that information was very clear.
How were they doing that? Were they speaking to the media?
They were, yes.
So you had your team speak to the media, but you as chief executive would not front that media in a time of severe crisis for your customers?
So I spent my time on the ground in Brixham and Kingswear and with the control room back at base, and making sure that our teams were supported in doing what they were doing every day.
Have you faced the media since the incident, the local regional media?
I have, as I said, I've just focused on making sure through that incident that we could get the situation resolved.
If you have future incidents of this nature, will you commit to speaking to the local media during the incidents to give reassurance to customers who are scared about how they drink water?
The best reassurances I thought I could give customers at that point was to make sure that they were getting all the information they needed from our incident director and from the customer services director.
I'm getting a little bit concerned here that you're being asked fairly straight and direct questions, but the answers are anything but. Helena's question was one that really could have given you a yes or a no.
So I think
are you prepared to make that commitment? If you're not, then fine, just say so and we'll move on.
I think it depends on incident to incident. There are things that I regret around the Brixham incident, and I should have, in retrospect, perhaps it would have helped if I had spoken to the media, but at the time I thought it was the right thing to do to make sure that everybody had the information that they needed.
Sorry, Helena.
Okay. Moving on to the cryptosporidium incident. So, a very serious incident last summer. Up to 1,000 people in Devon made sick by your company poisoning the water supply. Failures of communication, we've heard from local MPs, they were severely lacking. We've heard that you refused to face the local media at the time to give people that reassurance. Your company also severely failed to step in when you detected the cryptosporidium in the water supply. You didn't issue the boil notice until 24 hours after discovering the parasite. How do you explain that to customers?
Well, the first thing I do need to say is I absolutely understand how devastating it was for that community and for the customers who were poorly. It was a really horrible time for them. And
more people got sick because your company took too long.
Well,
would you accept that?
Perhaps if I can explain what happened, if that would be helpful. So cryptosporidium occurs in the natural environment. It is always there. And as other water companies do, we get notification perhaps 2 to 5 times a year of potential outbreaks of cryptosporidium in our region. And we have our testing that happens at our treatment works. Our treatment works is where all the raw water comes in, we treat it, and it's the final barrier before it gets into the network. Our samples, so we were alerted on the Monday the 13th from UKHSA that there were cryptosporidium cases.
What time?
It would have been late afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So we were and as I said, this is not unusual, so we do get a handful of these every year in terms of notifications, and hitherto they've never been something that has been as a result of our water supply. So what we do is we check our samples. So we are sampling for cryptosporidium in our treatment works all the time. That came back, the treatment works that serves Brixham is Little Hempston. That came back as clear. We then, as the rest of the sector do, into the networks. Once the drinking water's left the treatment works, it goes into the distribution network, into hold service reservoirs, so that it's there for use when you've got peak demand through the day. And we check for other pathogens there, E. coli and other nasties, just to make sure that there is nothing happened from final treatment works to service reservoir. And those came back clear as well, so the team checked that on the Monday afternoon. Nevertheless, UKHSA had told us there was an outbreak, and so we stood up the team to go and do some more thorough testing for cryptosporidium after the treatment works, because we knew it wasn't there, into the service reservoir and into the network. Now, to test for cryptosporidium, you need a lot of volume of water, because the cryptosporidium are little oosts, and you need to capture them in filters, so you need lots of water, and the tests take a good period of time before they come back. So we set up the testing rig on the Monday afternoon. We were doing the testing, taking all the volume and tests that we could, and then the results came back on the Wednesday morning that said there was cryptosporidium in our network. So
when did you issue the notice?
That was on the Wednesday morning.
So, I mean, you've just outlined a lot of detail around the testing procedure, but what seems to be the most clear takeaway from that is that your testing procedures failed. Because the HSA told you there was cryptosporidium, you did your own version of testing and thought there wasn't, left it too long, and then issued the boil notice when a lot of people had already consumed the contaminated water. So do you accept you need to change your processes for future to make sure something like that doesn't slip through and make people sick again?
So we've already changed that
Right.
now in terms of our procedures. So what we will do.
Therefore, that your procedures failed in this case, people got sick as a result, and you apologised to those people who ended up sick.
I absolutely apologise to those people who were poorly.
I'm conscious of time because we've got a lot of members that want to come in as well, but we've just talked through a very specific failing and very serious consequences for those customers. You took a decision weeks later to take a £300,000 increase in your pay package following such a failure. How do you explain that?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is my pay and remuneration is not set by me. It is set separately. I didn't take.
Turned it down.
I didn't take my annual bonus.
You didn't take your annual bonus, but you added extra to your pay.
So, because we're a FTSE listed business, we have share schemes that are there. I have to hold a shareholding within the business, within the group, a 200% shareholding, and the share scheme had matured, and that was the amount that it was equivalent to in terms of value. But I have that because I have a shareholding. That shareholding gets built up from those schemes maturing, but also me putting my own money into the business as well. That was the share scheme. It wasn't a cash bonus in that sense.
But you thought it was appropriate to take that dividend at a time when people had ended up in hospital after your company's failings?
I thought it was appropriate not to take the annual bonus.
When you told us earlier that you see your customers as shareholders, the 28 properties that were told that their supply was safe when it wasn't, they got offered £75 compensation. Does that look like is that how you treat your other shareholders?
In terms of, apologies, Chair, which incident was that one?
From the cryptosporidium incident, there are 28 properties where the water supply was still unsafe and they were told that they could drink it. And they got a message telling them that the boil order remained in place, and you offered them £75 compensation. Does that feel adequate?
There's probably a couple of things to say for the cryptosporidium support that we gave customers. In terms of financial support,
we are under serious pressure of time here.
Of course, yeah.
I've asked you a very direct question. Does your £75 offer of compensation in these circumstances feel adequate now with the benefit of hindsight?
All the customers who are impacted with that boil water notice, where we had found cryptosporidium in the supply, got the value of their annual bill in terms of compensation, and they got it in different tranches. So every customer had between £485 and £550 as compensation. So I think the amount you're talking about was one element of a compensation we gave those customers.
Just before we move on, Caroline Voden, the local Member of Parliament now in South Devon, has asked your company repeatedly to carry out a random testing of the domestic supply in homes in Higher Brixham and Kingswear. This comes to the point about customer engagement and restoring confidence. You've refused to do that. Why is that?
So there are two things about the cryptosporidium testing. The rigs that we have to set up. So during the event, we had a number of customers where we were testing at their taps. You need significant volumes of water to test for cryptosporidium at those taps. And you need to permanently leave the tap running for us to collect the samples for that.
We get that, but they're asking you to do it and you're saying you won't. Why is that?
Because practically it means turning on the taps of those customers constantly.
Is that a difficult thing to do?
Well, in terms of the litres of water you would be using, we need 1,000 litres for a cryptosporidium test. So it takes literally litres and litres and litres and a permanent taps running. Our experience...
Remind me how much you're losing from outage? Remind me how much you're losing as a company from pipe leaks and outages?
So
1,000 litres
12%.
doesn't look like much in that context, does it?
For a household who uses on average 145 litres per day.
So you would continue to resist the calls of residents to do that random testing?
So our experience for those customers where we were doing the testing through that cryptosporidium outbreak is that they got very
Okay.
In practical
I think
terms,
we've got
it was
the
very
sense here.
difficult for them.
Anna, can you pick up on water security?
Thank you, Chair. And briefly, let's return to a vital question raised earlier by the Chair. Can you confirm, as CEO, did you know about the non-disclosure agreement signed by customers? Yes or no?
As I said earlier, I'll have to find out the specifics of that particular
I think
case.
that's quite unacceptable to come before the committee without an answer to a question you would probably have been expecting to answer. Can you at least outline what areas did those NDAs cover?
I can't. I'm so sorry. I will have to come back to the committee with that answer.
Can I just, sorry Anna, but I mean, a non-disclosure agreement is a very serious matter. You're either telling us that you've signed this off and forgotten it, or else that actually this comes back to the culture of the company. You don't need to see these things. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know the specifics of that detail. I will have to come back to the committee on that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, moving on. We've already heard about serious concerns, including incidents in Lostwithiel and across Cornwall and Devon. And the Environment Agency in 2022 said that South West Water showed complacency and were not honest, transparent with regulators about their drought projections and potential risk to the security of supply. So on this important issue on water security, do you agree with that assessment? And how are you improving regional water security 3 years on from that assessment?
In terms of the droughts that happened in 2022, we set off in that year with relatively normal levels of resource across our regions. What happened through that 2022 year is that we had, well, two things happening really. Post the pandemic, we had significant numbers of visitors and people staying in the region, more than we'd ever had before. And if we recall, that was the year where there was still some restrictions around international travel. So we had a lot of visitors and customers in the region, and then we had one of the hottest, driest periods on record for our region that went from March to November. Very dry. Now our region for Devon and Cornwall, if I focus on Devon and Cornwall because that was where the acute issues were, Devon and Cornwall relies 90+% for water supply on abstracting from rivers. The reservoirs that we have there are there to back up the rivers and then don't plug into our treatment works, they're for the rivers. And the rivers were really suffering through that period, so we were releasing water from March onwards to make sure that the health of the rivers was kept. And we were following what technically we call our drought curves to understand where we got to.
Do you agree with the Environment Agency's assessment that you're not being transparent with regulators?
I wouldn't have characterised it in that way.
So you don't agree?
I mean, I think it was one of those, it was an unprecedented for us. It became, what we would have assessed as a 1 in 200 year event. It was, we were following normal drought curves, and then we got into the kind of June, July time, and we started raising the
I think this
is
another example of a concern around transparency. So I've asked you a question about, do you agree with their assessment? I don't feel I'm getting a transparent answer. Similarly to my question around the non-disclosure agreements, as CEO, I think you would have been aware, or you should have been aware, and we're asking you a simple question. So again, on the transparency issue, do you feel you were open, honest and transparent with the regulators?
I would say that we were, but I understand there are different views on what we did. I think what we did through that drought again was unprecedented. We, like I say, 90% we rely on the rivers. We made sure the rivers were, we had all the releases going into the rivers to keep the biodiversity and the health of the river where it was. We served our customers, but we had to put a hose pipe ban in place. We have invested significantly since that situation. We have put in, and in our region, as you will know, we've got disused mines and quarries. We've been repurposing those as kind of mini reservoirs and put those into play. So that we've got, at times of need, for Devon now, we've got a 30% increase in resource available to extract, and for
So on that
Cornwall,
question about
34%.
usage, I know the South West has failed to reduce water consumption per capita, and efforts to reduce leakage across the Pennon Group have had mixed results, I think it's fair to say. Is this increasing the risk of future usage bans in the area?
So in terms of our leakage, we have reduced leakage across the group over this 4 years. We have moved, from just shy of 18% down to around 16% of losses. So we are getting better, and there's customer-side leaks in that as well. So if you take those out, we're around about 12%. There is more to do in terms of leakage, and we have our bit to play. I think in terms of water resources, we have obviously invested significantly since 2022 to put in these repurposed reservoirs, and we've also put in some transfer schemes as well, which will be helpful. The one area that we have to deliver on, and we haven't yet delivered on, is around desalination. We have a small desalination plant on the Isles of Scilly, but we need to make sure that we've got that in our, let's call it, portfolio of resource going forwards, and that's something that we're still working on.
So do you accept that your reporting methods for leaks and consumer usage figures are inadequate? And if so, what are you doing to improve them?
I think in terms of where we have got to, it makes sense for everybody for consumption to reduce. So when we went through the drought, yes, we were looking at water resources and what we could do to repurpose the mines and quarries. We put in Hawkstall, we put in Blackpool Pit, which was great, and we extended what we could do with Park and Stannon, which were two earlier disused quarries that we repurposed. But we were also looking at water efficiency for customers as well. Our leakage, we put the most effort that we've had put into leakage for some time during that period to keep our leaks down. And for customers, it was about encouraging them around water efficiency, because it's good for customers. If you use less, it will cost less and you will pay less. So we ran a number of really good schemes. We gave out lots of water efficiency devices, free water butts, which we're still doing, and we encouraged customers. We had a campaign, you might have seen it, called Stop the Drop, which was Stop the Drop in the Reservoir, and Cornwall really came together. We saw customer usage reduce, and for some customers, it varied between a 3% reduction to 11% reduction for having those schemes in place. So they were really helpful and useful, and we need to do more of that. We've started.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we'll move
Right.
on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to move on now to questions surrounding your ownership model, financial performance, investment and the price review. Jenny, you're going to lead off for us?
I think Sarah could.
Oh, sorry, Sarah, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair.
I need to take better notes.
Thank you, Susan. You've obviously mentioned a few times that this is a listed company on the FTSE, but gearing levels in the Pennon Group are actually higher than recommended by Ofwat, particularly for SES Water, which is spending over a fifth of its revenues on servicing debt. I understand its gearing is like 79.1%, when Ofwat say that over 70% is destabilising. So what plans do you have to actually lower the gearing levels across this group?
Yeah, so in terms of a policy for gearing levels for the water businesses, I think it's really important to have a stable balance sheet. And I think gearing levels for water businesses make sense to work within the range of 55 to 65% in terms of gearing. And that's something that we've had as a long-held policy. And I think that gives us headroom to make sure we can invest when we need to as well. And keep the costs for that efficient financing as low as it can be. In fact, we have had for some period the lowest costs for our financing across the group. So we want to make sure that the balance sheet gets to the right position. We've just undertaken a £500 million rights issue for the group, which as a result of that, bring more equity into the business to directly go into that investment. The gearing levels naturally will be coming down across the group. Now, in terms of the acquisitions that we've made 3 water-only acquisitions. Each water-only company that we bought had a stretched balance sheet. We've bought the Bournemouth Water back in 2015. We bought that into South West Water. Balance sheet got repaired. Same for Bristol and SES. We're just going through the same process. So those balance sheets will be in a position where it's between 55 and 65, and I think that is a good place to be. If you look at the economic regulator and look at their previous price reviews and where they might land in terms of gearing levels for a notional balance sheet, it's tended to be around that 55 to 65 range.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'll cover off some final two questions, on this section at least. I noticed that SES has underspend of 30% on the enhancement budget, and that enhancement budget, as you'll know, is intended to allow for investment in water infrastructure. So why has that been underspent, and what are the consequences of that? Are we at risk of not seeing further improvements because of that underspend?
Yes, I think, as I said, with the water-only companies that we've acquired, we've done two things. We have brought them into the group. We have stabilised the balance sheets, and we have then given headroom for investment. So if you look at what we've done, both for Bournemouth when we acquired it and for Bristol, we have made sure that those balance sheets are available to invest. We took SES on. We bought it last January. We went through quite a lengthy CMA process and came out of that in the summer. So now our focus is on making sure we can get the expenditure. Now we've got the funding in, we get the expenditure done.
Should we be concerned that with that underspend that investment isn't happening to the critical infrastructure?
Not now, no. So we are really focused on making sure that that happens and that we get back to where we need to be for Sutton and East Surrey, and that investment will be undertaken. So, like I say, we've righted the balance sheet, so we've got headroom to do that.
And my final question, Chair. So Ofwat's final determination in the PR24 provided expenditure allowance of 3.8 billion, which I believe was 94 million less than you'd asked for, less than you'd hoped for. Appreciate that's 1.5 billion more than the previous PR cycle. How can you achieve your targets? And I think, importantly, what won't be taken forward as a consequence of that slimmed down budget that you asked for?
So in going through any business planning process, and I've been through quite a number because I've been in the sector for quite a period of time, but in going through that process, you have to look at everything in the round. We pretty much got what we asked for in terms of the business plan. We put in a good quality plan. We'd spent a lot of time with customers getting their priorities right. We spoke to over 30,000 customers in pulling all this together, which is why you'll see in our plan as well there's as much on water investment as there is on wastewater and the storm overflows work. So we put all that together. We've worked through it, we've looked at the numbers, and we're confident that we can deliver against that. And the best thing that we can do for our communities is get on and deliver.
What didn't you get?
So it's more of an efficiency. So the economic regulator will look at your business plan and assess the costs for delivering what you say you're going to deliver. And they will make an assessment using their econometric models as to how efficient you need to be with that. So we have then received that determination just before Christmas. We've diligently worked through it as a team. We know where we can make some efficiencies and right shape ourselves to deliver it, and so we're confident we can deliver.
Thank you, Jenny. And Tim, we'll let this run on a bit longer if necessary. So can you lead us through the questions, please, in relation to returns to investors and executive pay?
Thank you, Chair. Susan, your company approved £45 million in dividend payments for 24-25, which was a 265% increase from the £12 million in 22-23. Can you just talk us through how you can justify such a dramatic increase with the financial strain that households are facing at the moment?
Yeah, for South West Water, that was the dividend for South West Water. So just to be really clear with the committee as well, we haven't paid that 45 million, so that was a declared not paid dividend, if that makes sense. So the £12 million was the year before, and that was paid, but we have not paid the 45 million. And the reason why we haven't paid the 45 million is because financially for South West Water, we've had significant significant energy costs and other pressures, and we want to keep the balance sheet where it needs to be, so that dividend hasn't come through.
When did you decide not to pay the dividend?
So
it was announced, and then you decided that it wasn't appropriate to pay it?
Correct,
okay.
Yes.
So when did those two events happen?
I would have to check on the exact timing, but as a consequence of, as we always do, we look at the liquidity within the business, we see what we need to spend. And
because the initial announcement was immediately after the incident that we've talked about earlier, the cryptosporidium incident, and the public were a little bit angry that you're announcing an increase in dividend immediately after that crisis.
So it would have been a declaration in terms of what was available to pay, but in the accounts they would have already been done, so it wasn't paid in that sense. So it would have been before that cryptosporidium, so it was declared but not paid.
Right. And then in January, I think it's a 28% increase in bills customers are facing over the next period, but there was a similar announcement of an increase in dividend again. Does that seem fair to you?
So in terms of so there are two dividends that go on. There's the dividends from the water businesses to Pennon, and then the dividends to our shareholders, our external shareholders. In terms of those dividends, we've just been out to the market and we have got in £500 million of equity coming back into the business from our shareholders. And the dividend has been rebased. So it's actually been, 38% cut in the dividend per share, which then will grow by CPIH going forward. So on a per share basis, it's actually come down because there's more equity gone into the business. And then we have a dividend policy that we set out to 2030. And then each year as a board, we will go through what we think is the relevant dividend to pay. Now, in terms of our investors and
the intention is to increase the dividend payments with inflation by CPIH
after it's been rebased. So it's been rebased, so it's come down dividend per share by something like 38%, and then it grows from that onwards because we've had an equity raise, so we've had more equity in. So there's been £500 million come in, so there's more shares.
And we touched on pay earlier. So I understand your overall package was £860,000 in 22-23. Is that right?
Right. 23-24.
23-24. And what is it this year?
This year, so I have a base salary of £511,000. That's up from the 492 from last year.
And again, that's quite a large sum of money. Do you think that's fair remuneration for the work that you do?
So I don't set my remuneration. It is an independent committee that sets that, and they do that with reference to the FTSE 250 and the sector more broadly. If you look at where I sit within that range, I'm probably at one end of the range compared to the other. I think in terms of my role, I'm well paid for what is a very responsible, accountable role. And as I say, it is an independent committee that sets that.
And of the measures the committee used to set your pay, there's over 40 from what I could see, but affordability to the customer of their bills wasn't one of them. Did that seem fair to you?
In terms of, that's an interesting one. So in terms of the financials, something that I think is really important, what we try and do is deliver as efficiently as we can. We have a water share scheme where we give back to customers and reduce their bills, or they can get shares in the business. If we outperform and we reduce our costs, then customers benefit from that. So I think in terms of...
Do you think then affordability should be one of the measures you're measured against when your pay is being set? Affordability for customers of their bills?
Yes, there's two bits of affordability. There is the affordability in terms of keeping the overall bill level down, which is what I've just been describing, keeping costs as low as they can be, so that benefits
customers. It's not explicitly in the criteria, is it?
But in terms of your point,
there's financial efficiency of the company, of course, but there's no explicit measure for you to keep people's bills down in the way that your pay is set. Because if the company is incredibly efficient, it might just return more money to its shareholders, mightn't it?
We have a water share scheme for us, so we share everything with customers as well, so which is slightly different. But I appreciate your point. I think that's something that perhaps I will feed back to the committee around affordability. But I just want to reassure the committee here today that we really do focus on customer affordability. We've set aside some 200 million for the next 5-year period to support customers. It's something that the teams really work hard on. At any one time, we're helping customers. We must have helped just over 100,000 customers at any one time over the last 4 years who have really acute affordability issues. Having drinking water and sanitation is a public right, and we have to make sure that all customers have access to it and have an affordable bill. Is really important. And we have customers in our region who we give support to with a whole host of support mechanisms, either to help them afford not just their water bill but other bills. We go through their budgeting, and we've set aside a significant
these are
amount
large sums of money that, in terms of remuneration, that the public will obviously be concerned about. And Ofwat criticised your policies for the performance-related pay and suggested they don't match expected company performance. Do you share that assessment?
So I think, there's probably a couple of things to say. Obviously, the independent committee will be reflecting on those comments from the regulator, I know. I have shown over my tenure, yes, there are times when it's important to consider what's happening more broadly, whether it was, I didn't take pay increases through the pandemic, through the cost of living. I've had a history of not taking bonuses and annual bonuses. I didn't take it last year for the cryptosporidium outbreak. So I think it's important to always reflect on that position. But as I said, I don't set my pay. It is the independent committee, but I'll make sure that these comments go back to them.
Well, absolutely, because this is about rebuilding confidence. I mean, Ofwat said the company's proposed policy for executive pay does not meet minimum expectations. So, I mean, as the CEO, I'd hope you'd be reflecting back to the committee how important it is we do rebuild that confidence.
Yes. Agreed.
I mean, we spoke right at the top of the session about the leadership role that you have within the industry as a whole. Are you satisfied that you're meeting your obligations in that leadership role?
So I have worked in the sector for a long time, over 28 years. I think it's really important work that we do. I try to make sure that I am, there for my 4,000 brilliant colleagues across my group, but also for the rest of the sector in terms of the work I do with the Institute of Water as well. There are always things that you reflect on and think you could do better. Always. That's part of any learning on the job.
Thank you, Chair. You talked about how you've got a very responsible and accountable role, which is what justifies the £800,000 pay packet, but you didn't face the media when a major incident was unfolding, and you left that to your lower team members. Is that really showing leadership?
So for me, through that incident, we had 800 colleagues who were focused on that incident.
Yeah, but you couldn't spend 5 minutes speaking to the BBC or ITV.
I was spending all my time either in Brixham and Kingswear. I went on a Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, back at the control room.
And BBC and ITV were in Brixham, but you couldn't take 5 minutes to speak to them.
I was taking my time to meet customers, to help understand from them their concerns and what was happening, to talk to them and reassure them about the work that we were going through. It took us 8 weeks to clear the network of the cryptosporidium, and I wanted to make sure that I was there, to support my brilliant colleagues who were doing what they were doing, and also to hear from customers directly.
You earn around 5 times what the Prime Minister earns, and you think it's okay to evade media scrutiny when there's a major crisis happening in your company. Do you think people would think that was acceptable if the Prime Minister just went missing during a major crisis and didn't want to speak to the media?
I wasn't missing. I was very much on the ground, and I was very much supporting my colleagues. I've said before, and I'll say again, there are things that you regret, and perhaps...
So in future you will make yourself available to the media during incidents?
I think it will be on an incident-by-incident basis, but of course I am learning lessons from what happened with Brixham.
Okay, look, I think we're just about done. There's just one other thing that jumped out the page at me when we were considering the background reports we've had. 2022, you were fined for providing water that was unfit for human consumption. Fine of £233,333. The water in question was brown, had a strange odour, and the company response at the time was to tell customers to add a slice of lemon to remedy the taste. Was that acceptable?
No, it was not.
Why did it happen? What happened to the person who gave that advice?
Well, we obviously have worked really hard to make sure that we have learnt from that incident, and that advice is not
was
advice.
Was in your watch as chief executive?
No, it was we then. We went to court.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon,
yeah.
Yes, it was a fine in 2022.
Yeah, but I was still in the group.
But you were part of your CFO at that stage, yeah?
I would have been CFO, yes. Yes, but yes, unacceptable and not something that we would want to repeat.
Okay. Susan, thank you very much. That's been a quite enlightening session. We have a further panel to go on to. We'll run that for about an hour as well. But thank you for your attendance today, and thank you for offering your evidence to us. Thank you. Do we bring in the next panel? If we could perhaps just move on without suspending proceedings, if we have... Good afternoon, Nicola. Are you able to hear us there? Are you... you can hear us. You're obviously saying something, but we're not hearing you.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
We hear you now, yes. Okay, so the connections are working there. Good afternoon. Sorry, I'm running ahead of myself here. Good morning, Nicola. Very welcome. We have now a panel from Yorkshire Water. Nicola, can I invite you, just for the benefit of our official record and for those who are following the proceedings, to introduce yourself and your colleague who's in the room with us, and say we do appreciate you joining us virtually in this way. We know that you're recovering from, or maybe even still in a bout of shingles, which I think we all know, an unpleasant thing. So we appreciate you making the effort to join us.
Many thanks, and I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. Yes, I am still in pain, so I'm very grateful that you didn't make me come on the train. It's Nicola Shaw. I'm the Chief Executive of Yorkshire Water, and I'm joined by my colleague Paul Inman, the Chief Financial Officer of Yorkshire Water.
Okay. Paul, good morning. If we could perhaps just get right into the meat of the matter in relation to your environmental performance and investment. In July, the Environment Agency downgraded Yorkshire Water from 3 stars to 2. Pointed out unacceptable and disappointing record. You're rated red for pollution incidents. How do you rate your performance, and what are you doing to improve on that?
I don't disagree with them. It's not the performance we want. We need to improve. And that's why we have been investing heavily in our network and will continue to do so in the next 5 years. We made a change in 2022-23 and we said, look, we need to do more. And we've invested 180 million just in the last 2 years from that point, which will finish a programme by March this year. Which will really have made a big step forward in the number of discharges from our most heavily discharging storm overflows. But there is a lot more for us to do. We've got a network that has been struggling for a long time, and we need to make a step change in that.
Yeah, I mean, you may have heard the previous evidence session, I don't know or not. We dwelt there a little bit on the culture within the company in question, which was Pennon. How would you characterise the culture that you seek to foster within Yorkshire Water, and questions of customer engagement and accountability, transparency. How do you describe your company in these terms?
So I joined Yorkshire Water in 2022 and recognised that there was a lot to do to turn around the performance of the company. In particular, I thought we needed to change our strategy, that we needed some people change and culture change, as you're pointing to. And there were some things we needed to do in terms of process and systems. So in terms of the strategy, the first thing we did was review that and said, where should we be seeking to be? What do we want to do in Yorkshire? And how can we align our culture and our organisation behind that? We want to achieve a thriving Yorkshire, which is doing the right thing for our customers and for the environment. We know we are not doing that at the moment. So we've set out that is our direction. That's what we want to achieve. And we're setting a culture to deliver against that. One of those parts must be compliance with all our obligations, which is not where we have been. We've been open about that. And we're working with our team to understand the way we need to change in order to deliver better. That's partly, as I've said, through processes, adherence to our processes, checking our processes are right, making sure that we look after our assets in the right way. And asset health has been poor. So that's meant a lot of investment and clear thinking about the way to get the best bang for our buck. It's really important that we focus, given how much there is to do and how we don't want to let our customers down.
Okay. Now, in recent years, you have been fined several millions of pounds for environmental, operational and customer service failures. It looks like you're going in the wrong direction at the moment as a company, notwithstanding what you've just told us. You've had £47 million for failing to manage wastewater, £150,000 for polluting the River Don, £19.85 million for missing targets on customer satisfaction, supply interruption and drinking water, £1.6 million for polluting a Bradford watercourse. How do you explain this trend in your engagement with regulators?
Just as a slight correction, and it doesn't make a difference into the overwhelming nature of what you've just described, the Bradford Beck penalty was 1.6 million, not billion. So I just thought I should correct that. No, it's fine. Look, our performance.
I think it does make a difference, actually.
It's a big number. Our performance has improved in some areas. So we've really focused, for example, on improving leakage. We've reduced that by 15% over the last 5 years and will continue to improve that. Really important when only 2 years ago, what we were dealing with was drought. So you see the things that we're covering as an organisation are significant. We try to be really open with our regulators, very clear about the areas that we need to improve and what we are doing to improve. I am not saying that our performance is good enough. I know it isn't. And we recognise that in infrastructure, things take a long time to make changes. The public is obviously dissatisfied, and rightly so. And that's why we apologised in 2022 for having been too slow to respond to their disgust about sewage in waterways. And we absolutely were. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be seeing improvements. We've got a lot to do, a lot of investments on the way at the moment. Many of those are already delivering.
Okay, I mean, just on that point then about sewage overflows, you're one of the worst performing companies for sewage overflows, aren't you?
We are. We have about 2,100 across Yorkshire, and they are discharging more frequently than we would like.
What does that come to in terms of an average day for discharging raw sewage?
So we're at, this is one of those areas where numbers are not always your friend. So we discharge on average 31 times per overflow per year. That's a reduction when you take into account the number we have and the number that we have monitors on from 2021 of about 13%, but it's still a very large number. So we've set ourselves a target of taking that down to 20 on average by 2030. And we're really focusing in some areas and seeing already some success. So, for example, we've been investing, as I told you, there's 180 million in a number of places. One of them is at Pateley Bridge, where we've seen a reduction in the number of discharges this year, having made the investment last year. And that's the sort of thing we want to see across the county.
I mean, is there not a kind of pattern emerging here in what describes about your performance, in that basically it all comes down to a failure to upgrade the assets as and when they're required? I mean, look at Ilkley Beach, for example. Highest level of untreated sewage anywhere in the United Kingdom. You can't be happy with that, surely?
No, I'm not happy. And that's why we've made an investment. Last year, we built a new tunnel from the centre of Ilkley under the main road down to just across that main road from the sewage treatment works, and then across to the sewage treatment works, which added capacity to our storage ability. And we're now adding about another 5 times the amount of storage at the sewage treatment works in Ilkley to make a real difference. We should have done that by March next year. That in total is about £75 million of expenditure. So I totally agree with you. We're not in the right place. I don't think that is only Yorkshire Water's fault. There are a number of players who've been involved in deciding what has been invested in these networks, all water networks, over a number of years, including Ofwat. And I think it's been a real struggle for the industry when bills are lower now in real terms than they were 20 years ago. That's been a challenge. And the water industry has been, I think, not sufficiently confident in making its case for more expenditure and making sure that it was really aware of the long-term impacts to the environment and to customers of not doing that.
How long would you expect to be rated red for environmental pollution?
I think we will be rated red again this year, and I think it'll take us a while to make that improvement. The serious pollutions is what leads to a red rating on the environmental performance assessment from the Environment Agency. And we need to get that down to 0. That's our objective. Serious pollutions are those that are categorised 1 or 2, and we've had too many of those. So we had a review last year. We did a review of ourselves, looking at all of our data, looking at what was causing that to happen. Long rising mains close to a watercourse is our biggest factor. And so we've worked, there are a number of others too, that's just the biggest. And we've worked with Cranfield University to review the programme that we've put in place, having done that analysis. And then we're tracking our performance against that programme, but there's a long way to go.
Okay, thank you. Henry, you're going to take us through some questions on asset maintenance, major incidents and customer satisfaction.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on supply interruptions first. I think all water companies are expected to have an average interruption length about 5 minutes and 23 seconds per property. And I think you're about, in 23-24, Yorkshire Water were about double that, so you're 10 minutes, 35 seconds on average. I was wondering why that was the case and what you were doing to improve that. I also wanted to touch on a specific incident in Goole as well, that you effectively Ofwat and the Consumer Council for Water said you failed residents in respect of that instance, and bottled water was only supplied to 44 out of 600 homes. So if you could talk about why such little support was provided to residents and what you're doing about the supply interruptions.
Yes, of course. Should we do Goole first? It was a very difficult incident for us to manage and for customers to experience. It lasted for a couple of weeks where we had low pressure in the network. It's a combination of a number of different bursts and challenges with water in our water tower. We had in the area a number of homes that were either experiencing no supply or low pressure or discoloured water for different durations during that 2 weeks. So it was very disruptive for people. And I think that's something that really comes out in the work that Ofwat and the Council for Water did, looking at the impact of it. For us, it was difficult because we were managing pressure valves that weren't giving us the information we were hoping for. And so we were finding it difficult to give customers certainty about when the resolution would come.
But why didn't you set up any water stations? Why didn't you set up any water stations?
Well, first, on your 661 customers, that was the customers on our priority services register. And we did speak to all of them and identify which ones needed water and asked us to bring them water. So that's why we identified those 44 houses who really said, could you bring us some water? And we did so. We didn't set up stations elsewhere because we thought that at the time there was still supply. I think in retrospect that was the wrong decision. We've also changed our approach to that now, and similarly we've seen improvements even when we've had outages in the last few months.
And why did Ofwat and the CCW, why did they have to intervene in April 24 about payments in respect of compensation? So why weren't you more proactive?
Yeah, Ofwat and the CCW did a review as part of their ongoing process of picking out different issues across the water industry to do such a review. It wasn't because they were particularly wanting to come and talk to us about had we been proactive enough. They did a review, they talked to some customers, and we and they learnt a lot from that.
Can we go back to the supply interruptions? Perhaps I should have phrased the questions one after the other. In terms of the record that you have about supply interruptions. So
yes,
yeah.
we have had challenges, as you say. We have got places where we haven't been providing supply, and that's led to high numbers of minutes. Mostly in Yorkshire, we have what's called a network, so we can move water around the county, and we can rezone if we have challenges. But on occasion, we can't do that. So there are parts of the network that only have supply from one pipe. We can't make sure that people get water from elsewhere. And that's a resilience challenge for us. So when we have a burst in the way that you've just been describing, and we don't have water to supply, it can be difficult for us to get that supply back on in quick time. And so we are working very hard to improve our processes and to get extra resilience into our network. We've done that, for example, by putting more measurement devices into the network so we can tell where there may be pressure issues or something's happening, so we can respond before it becomes a problem for our customers.
Can I quickly touch on the internal sewer flooding instance? Because you're above what all companies are expected in terms of the incidents per 10,000 sewer connections. So, and Ofwat has stated that you have not spent what you were forecast to do over the 2020-25 on reducing that flooding risk. So why is that?
Yeah, I think that's largely because we've prioritised. I'll stand back. I'll say first, yes, we are in the wrong place in relation to internal sewage flooding. Secondly, we have actually reduced that by about 16% over the course of the last 5 years. But thirdly, there is more that we need to do, and we need to make sure we continue to invest in doing those things. Ofwat has absolutely called out that we need to do more, and we agree.
And lastly, before I hand over to I wanted to talk about customer complaints. So the Consumer Council for Water has ranked you among the worst water companies at handling customer complaints. And there's been a rise. Complaints have risen by 90%, and those referred to the CCW have risen by 29% in 23-24. So why have complaints risen so sharply, and what are you doing to improve your customer relations?
Well, the good news is that we last year did a review with the Consumer Council for Water. They came to see us in Yorkshire, and we worked through a number of specific cases and generic approaches. And so we've made some changes, and the good news is that the numbers of cases being referred to them has reduced. So we saw there was an issue, we worked with them, and things are improving.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to some questions. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Nicola. I just want to revisit the point around the Priority Services Register. Are we right in saying that you're one of the worst performers in terms of reaching the target set by Ofwat?
Yes, you are. We have made an improvement, and I'm expecting us to achieve that goal and to get to the levels we should have been at this year.
And that's true for the last 4 years, correct?
It is.
And have you been aware of that yourself?
I have, and that's why we've put in a new programme, and we're expecting to achieve the levels this year.
If we're aware of it, why was the decision made to only supply 44 homes on the priority register in Goole at the outage? You would have known that you would be putting at risk some of your customers, knowing that your priority service register wasn't sufficient.
Yes, well, it's very difficult for us in those circumstances, and that's why I thought it was really important that we engaged further with them. I'm really sorry, I cannot see you now. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Yes, we're seeing and hearing.
Oh, good. Okay. So yes, that's why we have changed our approach to the PSR, and we're really pushing to get up to the levels that we ought to have. We work really hard with energy companies as well to collect the data from them and share it with our customers, and to make sure we've got all of our more elderly customers on our register as well.
I understand that, and I think your customers will welcome that news, but I think I'm questioning the decision making, that you knew that your priority services register wasn't up to scratch, and you knew as an organisation that it lacked, it wouldn't have been a complete register, and you made that decision to only supply 44 households with bottles, knowing that you would be leaving vulnerable and at-risk customers without sufficient services. I'm questioning the decision making rather than the review of that list.
Well, as you say, when you don't know, it's very difficult to take action. What we have done, or what we did in Goole first, was to communicate a lot. We did it through the media, through social media, and as much as we could, where we've got customers who are digitally engaged with us, we communicated directly with them. We had messages out on our website and so on, to make sure that anybody who needed help would communicate with us, recognising now that that wasn't sufficient, but at the time those were the things that we had at our disposal. We're also working with the local authority to try and seek out others if anybody else needed help.
So if that were to happen again, would you put aside the failures of your service register, priority service register, and would you commit to making sure that households would be not compensated, but would receive the bottled water and would receive water stations, and that you wouldn't rely on data that wasn't sufficient to make appropriate decisions?
Well, for example, last November we had an issue in Doncaster, and there we did have 3 different water stations where we were supplying bottled water, as well as going direct to those who were on our priority services register.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, can I?
Yes, please.
Yorkshire Water, as the only major company in 23-24 to see an increase in the per capita water consumption and your reduction targets not being met. So why is it proving such a challenge for you in terms of that water's consumption?
I accept that we had an increase, but on the other hand, we are the region with the lowest per capita consumption in the country at the moment. So we did have an increase, and we think that was a combination of changes to the way people work and the way people work in the office or at home, most likely. But we are working very hard to continue to improve. And for example, we have quite a big smart metering program over the next 5 years to help customers. We communicate with customers actively about how they can manage their water. You may have seen our 3-minute shower videos and music plays. So it gives people ways to think about how to consume less.
Okay. Right, we move on then to questions surrounding your ownership, financial resilience and the price review. Paul, this may be your moment to shine.
Right, yes.
Josh, can I ask
you
to read the questioning here?
So, as we know, Ofwat examines many areas of water companies' operations, and Yorkshire Water's financial resilience has concerned Ofwat for a number of years now. Why do you think that the regulator has cause for concern, and what are you doing to improve that financial position?
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress, I think, over the last few years, particularly this regulatory cycle, to improve that. And we recognised Ofwat's concerns. At the beginning of this regulatory price review, we had gearing at about 78%. And I'm pleased to say that by September of last year, we'd reduced that to 70%. So we're much more in line with Ofwat's guidelines. Indeed, we'd made a commitment to Ofwat that in a regulatory gearing perspective, we would be at 72% at the beginning of the next AMP, and we're well on target to do that. We would then hope to maintain that position through AMP8, and that's absolutely part of our plans.
Okay, so Yorkshire Water is privately owned by several overseas investors, and it's financed under a whole business securitisation model, which I think anybody would look at and call complex. What do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of that particular model?
It's a model that's common across a lot of the privatised companies within the sector. It was put in place back in 2008 when, you're right, the 4 shareholders that we have acquired the business. It's there really to put a ring fence financially around the regulated business of Yorkshire Water and the elements that finance it. It has a number of financing subsidiaries that sit below the water company. It provides some additional protections for lenders to Yorkshire Water, and therefore allows us to improve our credit rating compared to what would otherwise be the case, and then finance the business more cheaply, which is obviously in the interest of our customers. So it's a wrapper effectively that allows us to finance the business in a more cost-effective way.
Okay, so previously Ofwat has investigated Yorkshire Water for the misuse of intercompany loans. They went as far as reprimanding you for making loans within this complex business structure without their consent, as was required. Do you understand why Ofwat and your customers would have been concerned by that?
Absolutely, yeah, we do understand. I mean, this intercompany loan between the holding company and Yorkshire Water came into being around about 2008 to 2010. It increased its balance to about £940 million over time, and we have been in discussion and agreement with Ofwat that we would reduce that loan. When I came into the business, indeed when Nicola came into the business, the loan sat at £940 million. We agreed with Ofwat that we would repay that loan over a period of time. To date, we paid down £500 million of that loan. There's a remaining £440 million to pay. That balance is due to be paid by March 2027 and is a key part of our financing plans for the next regulatory period. That will then extinguish the loan, and there'll be no more intercompany loans between Yorkshire Water and its parent company.
So you're on track to meet that target in 2 years' time? Okay.
Yeah.
So in the previous Parliament, this committee took evidence on financing models of water companies, and some witnesses suggested that this WBS model allows water companies to take on a higher level of debt gearing, which you mentioned, without damaging their credit scores. So it could be said that that's essentially gaming the system, so that at least on paper you remain within the investment grade boundaries of the licence. How can you justify that, and how are you ensuring that this corporate structure you have supports financial resilience going forward?
I'll probably separate a little bit the sort of overall gearing and financial resilience elements of Yorkshire Water from that WBS structure that you referenced. On paper, yes, the WBS would allow us to gear up the company more, and I think I've already referenced to the position we had at the beginning of this 5-year regulatory cycle. We don't see that being the case as we move forward, and indeed I've explained that we've reduced our gearing to 70%, which is well below the level that would in theory be enabled by the WBS, and we would expect to hold it in that position. Very much focused on making sure that the financial structure of the business is resilient for the future, irrespective of the WBS that was put in some many years ago.
So Ofwat recommends that you hold the gearing at around 70%. Why would you not reduce it lower than that?
I think that comes into decisions on the best way to finance the water company for sustainability and to ensure that we can invest for our customers. We have a regulated capital value of just over £9 billion. Our job is to make sure we can finance that £9 billion in the way that's resilient but most cost effective to customers. So there's always going to be an element of debt financing and equity financing as we seek to get that balance right. Obviously equity is more expensive than debt, so we try and skew that towards a more higher leverage position than a sort of 50-50 type approach and get that right balance. So we think at that 70% level we can continue to maintain our investment grade credit ratings, which is critically important for us, but also get the financing of the company right that's in the best interest of longevity but also cost to the customer.
In terms of raising that equity, we've heard from other water companies that their owners were looking at the determination from the priority review and on that basis deciding whether they were going to inject cash into the business or not. Is Yorkshire Water in that position, or are you confident that regardless of the price review you'll get the equity you need?
Yeah, I think we're confident when we look ahead over the next 5 years. As you'll have seen, we asked for just over £8 billion of investment in the business over the next 5 years. Been really pleased to see that Ofwat supported us in our plans. So we're now setting out our stall to deliver on that plan over the next 5 years. That will include maintaining our gearing, as I've explained, and we will do that because we have the surety of our commitment to repay the intercompany loan. So that 440 million that I mentioned, in addition to the interest that balance is accruing, will mean that Yorkshire Water will receive about £600 million from the Kelda parent company over the course of the next couple of years, which really provides a strong underpin to our plans for the next 5 years.
Okay, so just finally from my question, just turning from raising money to spending it, like most water companies over the last 4 years or so, Yorkshire Water's overspent on your wastewater and water allowances, so your sort of everyday expenditure. What's particularly concerning is that you've underspent your allowances for enhancement by 31%. Does that not expose an issue with the delivery of your investment programme? And is that underperformance exacerbating some of the environmental, financial, operational issues that we've been discussing this morning?
Yeah, I think what it does show is that, let's say we had a slow start to AMP7 in terms of our pace on the enhancement programme. But both Nicola and I have been very focused on that in the last 2 years to accelerate that. And we've seen the level of our capital investment in the business increase markedly over the last couple of years. Indeed, this year, we will have capex of around £850 million into the business, which will be our record every year. We will never have invested as much as that in the network as we deliver the remaining obligations that we have for AMP7. So I think we had a bit of a slow start, partly COVID related, partly some other issues, but we have accelerated very quickly as and we will finish the AMP strongly. Indeed, that level of investment, the £850 million, we will need to increase it a little in order to deliver the full £8 billion programme for AMP8, but it is not a step change for us. So we're already running at a rate, and we are absolutely determined to have a fast start into AMP8 and not repeat some of the challenges that we had in AMP7 in terms of delivery of our programme.
So are you confident that you won't see the same under-investment in the following 5 year
We are confident, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Josh. Just before we move on, can I just tease out a bit more on the subject of the gearing here? You're sitting at 70%. That's the point at which Ofwat describe it as being unstable. But you seem quite happy to sit at 70%. The previous evidence you may have heard said they were aiming to 55 to 65, which still sounds quite high to me. Why is this? Are Ofwat wrong in characterising 70% as unstable, or are you happy just to have an unstable business?
No, we're very focused on having a resilient business, Chair, as we look ahead into the future. I think it's a judgment call at the end of the day about what's an appropriate level of gearing for us as a business that we think allows us to finance our business as we move forwards at a level that is most cost effective to the customer. And we're trying to get that balance right all the time. We believe that we can do that at 70%. Others have slightly lower gearing than us in the sector. Others have more gearing than us in the sector.
Indeed.
We think that is a reasonable position for us to take. If we think about looking forward into the next AMP, as you know, we're investing in capital expenditure, and we do recover that money from our customers over the longer term. Over the next 5 years, we'll have an expenditure of about just over £8 billion, of which I will recover about £6.5 billion in our customer fees. So I have about £1.5 billion to finance looking forwards into the next AMP. 600 million of that will come in the way I've explained in terms of the intercompany loan, and we'll finance the rest on borrowings, which will hold our gearing at about that 70% mark. We think that's a good position for us to be in order to be confident we can deliver our plans for the next 5 years.
Okay, on the subject of instability, Nicola, it looked like your connection was a little bit unstable for a second. Are you still hearing and seeing us okay?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Paul. We'll move on now to some questions surrounding returns to investors and executive pay. Tim, can I ask you to lead us on that?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I'll address it to you, Paul, in the first instance. So Yorkshire Water's return on equity has been 6.2%, which is significantly above Ofwat's recommended 4% level. The shareholder return has been about 10% on average, despite the penalties and the fines for the underperformance that we've certainly heard of today. Why do you maintain such high shareholder rewards in this context?
Just to clarify, so I think the dividend that Yorkshire Water has been paying during the course of this AMP has been around about 3%. So I'm not quite sure I recognise the 10% number that you're referring to. We paid about £345 million of dividends during AMP7 to the end of year 4 of the AMP, which is around just under 3%. We'd expect that to continue for the final year of this AMP. And that's a return on the regulated equity that we have in the business. That's below what Ofwat would say a performing water company should pay as a dividend in terms of its allowed and assumed financing returns. But that's because, as Nicola's explained, we're not performing in the way that we would want to perform. But that's about the sort of level of return that we've been paying to the shareholders and the holding company over the course of this AMP so far.
And the University of Greenwich suggests, just talking about bill payers, that about a third of the average bill for a customer, which is about £442, a third of that is going away from frontline services and into debt or dividend payments. Do you recognise that figure?
Not quite as high as that. So I would say that of our average customer bill, about 49% of it goes to pay our ongoing daily operating costs, so the cost of energy, chemicals, the cost of our staff. About 28 pence of it goes into the repayment of capital investments that we've made in the past, so recovery, as I explained, of the capital expenditure into the network that our customers pay over time to match the usage of the assets, and about 23 pence in financing, so about 23% compared to the 33% that you mentioned. And that's a mixture of interest on debt, on our borrowings, but also the allowed dividends that we make under the regulatory model.
So linking to borrowing, obviously we talked about gearing before, BBC analysis suggests that you've paid £2 billion in interests on debt and loans over the last 7 years, and that the total debt pile has increased from 4.8 billion to 6.2 billion, while only 1.2 billion has been spent on enhancement capital expenditure. Does that seem like an acceptable balance of spending and borrowing?
Well, our debt is about 6.8 billion at this particular point in time. And yes, that has increased as the regulatory capital value of the business has increased and we've invested. I think we pay around about £200 million a year in cash interest from Yorkshire Water and about 75 million of dividends, so about £275 million of financing costs compared to that £849 million of capital investment that I mentioned we'll have this year. Clearly those ratios change a little bit, and we were underspending, as per the previous question, against our allowances in the early part of the AMP. But you've got to look at these things over the longer term, and I think as we end this AMP, then we're investing significantly more in the business than we're paying out on financing costs and dividends at this point.
It's quite a sensitive issue to the public, the level of debt within the sector overall. I don't know if you have a comment on it, because I think overall since privatisation, something like £70 billion has been taken out in dividends, but £60 billion of debt has been created as well.
If you look at Yorkshire Water, I think from the point of our current shareholders taking ownership of the business in 2008, we've paid just under £2 billion in dividends. That's a return of around about 5%, I think, over that time period. That's of an order of magnitude of the return that we might expect to see. What's critically important, of course, is that we are able to show a return to the organisations that are financing the business. As I've explained, if you look at the regulatory model, we have to finance investment at the point we put the capital expenditure into the network, and we recover that money from our customers over around about 20 years. So we have a 20-year financing horizon that we need to think about. We do that through a mixture of debt and equity.
Thanks. Nicola, can I turn to you to talk about executive pay, which is obviously very much in the media. It's a monopoly business. You've got captive customers. It is controversial. Can I ask, last year your base salary was 585,000. Is that right?
Yes.
And then I think there were taxable benefits of 13,000, retirement benefits of 59,000, which you took in cash.
Yes.
And then on top, which is the controversial element, I suppose, although that's a great deal of money, there is the EIP short-term element, which I guess is what people would consider a bonus of £371,000. Do you feel that's a fair approach to remuneration?
So my shareholders and the board of Yorkshire Water decided through their remuneration committee to set us really stretching targets in relation to a number of things. And in particular, we improved and continue to improve on leakage and in relation to our staff engagement and staff safety. And they wanted to reflect that in what had been quite a difficult year. But they also recognised that we had done nowhere nearly well enough in relation to our outcomes in the environment and therefore removed any bonus related to the environment. But I do accept it is a large number.
It is a very large number, and I guess customers will be considering value for money. I don't want to misquote you. I think you defended the plans to increase bills by 41% after receiving the bonus, saying that shareholders wanted to make sure you were kept incentivised. Were you not incentivised with the 657,000?
There's a real focus on trying to laser in on specifics. That's how often remuneration works in organisations like ours, making sure you're really focused on particular metrics that the board takes a view is the most important. And that's what, in Yorkshire Water, the board decided through the remuneration committee.
I guess, I feel like Abraham Maslow is probably turning in his grave that you wouldn't be incentivised with that base salary. And in the basket of measures the Remuneration Committee uses to look at whether you should receive the EIP, affordability for the customer of their bills isn't part of that basket of measures, is it?
No, that's correct.
Is that something the Remuneration Committee might consider for the future, bearing in mind the way families are struggling with the cost of living at the moment?
That actually, the affordability of our bills is something that we approach in two ways. The first is to support our customers, our vulnerable customers, significantly. In Yorkshire, we have some of the most deprived communities in the country, and we give more support to our customers who are in vulnerable circumstances than almost any other water company. We're the second most supportive water company across the country. And we will continue to do that. We've made an additional commitment through the next period, the next 5 years, to do more to support over 135,000 customers across the AMP. And we also know that for some customers, there'll actually be a bill reduction because they're in the most strained circumstances. So we are working really hard to make sure we continue to support those who need it from the bill. And the board will keep pressing for continued work with Ofwat on ensuring that we get the right balance for affordability over the long term.
Nicola, are you alive and are the board alive to the concerns that the public have in this area? Fitch downgraded you in January. You were the second worst company for pollution in 2023. You're in the elevated concern category of Ofwat, and yet you've received an additional £371,000, taking your pay to £1,028,000. That might seem excessive to some.
I'm absolutely alive to it. As you probably recognise, there's been a lot of coverage of this issue, and I've been asked questions directly about it. So yes, I am very aware of concerns, and the board has equally been made aware of them.
Thank you. Eleanor. Yeah, sorry. Jane.
You're getting us mixed up. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about social tariffs, actually, because I asked at a previous session about this, and it did concern me. You said that you gave a lot of support to your customers. I was just looking at the Ofwat's PR24 determinations, and they said the social tariff provision, you're expecting to increase it from 2% of households to 5%, but that's still quite a lot lower than the 9% sector average. Are you thinking more around, from what you said earlier, about increasing that level of social tariffs? And would you support a national social tariff if it came in at the level of, say, 9%?
So Yorkshire Water is one of the few businesses in the country where our shareholders also contribute to the support for vulnerable customers, because they've taken it as a view it's really important. We've obviously also seen an increased willingness, which is a really very, very is impressive. People's public perception is that they want to support others around them during this difficult time. So we're able to provide more support for our customers than we were in the period 2020 to 25. We will be putting up that investment from 25 to 30. In terms of do we support a national tariff? Yes, if it continues to work in the way to give the support that we need to give across Yorkshire. As I said, we're one of the most deprived areas of the country, and there are real challenges about making sure that any national tariff works to support customers actively in those areas where we're struggling.
I suppose I still think that even if you increase it with the increases you're talking about up to 5%, that's still only just over half the average. Why so low? Why so few?
So the contribution that other customers made towards vulnerable customers during the period from 2020 to 25 was about £7, and it's gone up to £20. So a significant contribution from the vast majority of the people in Yorkshire to support those who are on lower incomes, as well as a doubling of the support from I think a doubling, maybe a 30% increase in the support from our shareholders to those vulnerable customers.
So the amount has gone up for each customer rather than the percentage of households rising to the average. Is that what
we're balancing that? So it depends on your level of income. If you're the lowest income customers, you will probably get a reduction in your bill, and then there's a gradation of that all the way through. But anyone on a low income will get some support from us if they apply, and we're encouraging everybody to get in touch. We're working really hard with citizens' advice and with the local councils to make sure that as much as possible people are aware of the support we can give.
Nicola, just before we leave this, can I just tease out with you, maybe taking your own personal position out of the picture, but looking at the position of the sector as a whole. The package that Tim described to you and you agreed puts you on a base salary that's over 3 times what the Prime Minister's paid. And that seems to be in line with industry norms. Given the poor performance environmentally in terms of customer satisfaction across the whole piece, how sustainable is it for the industry to carry on operating in this way, do you think? Now, quite apart from your own position, just to look at the industry as a whole. The witness before you also took on a leadership role in the industry. Where is the leadership coming from here?
So the multiple questions there, I think, Chair. On the pay in particular, I think one of the challenges is how to adapt and move ourselves forward in a world in which things are very competitive. So one of the challenges for, I think, all of the companies in the sector is how do you get people in to stay in these companies who will turn them around, and who'll do that over time collectively with the regulators and with their shareholders. And I think that's really important. Secondly, your more general point about leadership in the sector, I'm really looking forward to the work of Sir John Cunliffe in helping us address that. We have multiple regulators, multiple people with views, multiple organisations across the sector. And it is very difficult for anyone to set out a stall and to make that then deliver through a number of years. And so in that very noisy environment, it'd be really useful, I think, the work that Sir John Cunliffe is going to do to review the sector. Most regulated utility sectors, in my experience, have such a review about every 10 years because the challenges in front of the sector change, and therefore the way you need to address them changes. We haven't had such a review in the water sector for over 30 years. So it is a real opportunity to look forward, look at what our challenges, what our objectives are over the next 10 years, and set ourselves up as an industry for success for our customers and the nation.
I mean, because you're obviously across the brief, you're in control of your company, you understand its workings. but what is it going to take to get back to a model where water companies again are low risk for low reward, do you think?
I think we all need to deliver on the commitments we've made in the next 5 years. That's really important, to give people the confidence that we are doing the right things. If we fail to do that, that won't help. Secondly, I think there needs to be a real sense for all of us that we have a common direction, which has to be, as you say, low risk and low reward. And at the moment, that's not the case. We have rating agencies who are saying it isn't low risk. We're not AAA any longer as a sector. We're only single A. And that makes a big difference for our customers over time. So keeping those costs as low as possible needs us to get to the place where we're low risk. So I think we've all got to deliver, but we also need to have an environment in which the perception of this industry changes.
Okay. Well, look, we'll doubtless return to this in the weeks and months to come, and as you say, Sir John Cunliffe's work, which we would hope to inform us the consequence of these accountability hearings, is an absolutely critical and central part of that. So, Nicola, Paul, can I thank you for your attendance here today, for giving evidence, and we shall, as we say, be speaking to some of your colleagues in other parts of the industry, but in the meantime we're very grateful for your participation today, and I conclude the proceedings at that point. Order.